Hey there, and welcome back to another video about scripting in Premiere. In the past couple movies, I've gone through an introduction of what the idea of this scripting is, how it relates to After Effects, a little bit about what it can do, and then I really dug deeper into how to get a script to run within Premiere. Knowing that once I shared some cool scripting stuff with you guys, I didn't want you to be limited to the extend script interface. I wanted you to be able to jump in right away with whatever projects you do and take them into Premiere. Well, now we've got all that housekeeping taken care of, and we can actually jump into scripting and getting Premiere to do exactly what we want it to do. So the first thing that you're going to need if you want to do this is Extend Script Toolkit, which if you go to your Adobe Creative Cloud panel here, you can go to the apps page and go down, and it should look something like this with this icon of a little script. Once you install that, you'll open it up and you'll see an interface like this. Now I've already written out some code here so that you guys just don't see me typing for this whole video. I'd like to keep it a little bit shorter, but this is what it will look like. A couple things to note before we go into the actual code. In order to make these run and test them in Premiere, you'll need Premiere open side by side, but you'll also need to link ExtendScript to Premiere. When you open it up, it'll by default say ExtendScript Toolkit up here, and that's not going to target Premiere to run the scripts that you're writing. So you need to move this down and target Adobe Premiere Pro. And then once you do that, you'll also be able to come over here and see some information about the application, in this case Premiere, that you're scripting for. And now we have this little half and half screen going. I'm sorry if it's really small. I'll try and zoom in on the code more often than not in the editing of this video. Let's get started with a few basic functions that we can run within Premiere. So the first thing you need to do is access the application. And basically, almost every single object that you access in Premiere is going to be accessed through app.project. So it's really easy right at the very top of the script to just declare a variable and call it app.project. That way you don't have to write this phrase over and over and over again throughout your whole project. And we'll do this more and more as we dig down deeper through the objects of the project. We'll kind of keep declaring these variables that will allow us quicker access so that we're not just typing or copy and pasting, and our code's a little more readable. So if we have this, and then I come over here and just do a quick alert of project.name. If I run that, you can see that it returns the name of this project, getting started. Okay, well, we can comment that out and come down and do some more interesting stuff. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to call that project variable that we made. Then I'm going to access the root item. Now, one way to think of the root item is kind of like the project panel. When you call for root item, it's like you're calling for the project panel, but you're not really calling for anything in that yet. So if we call that and then run the method create bin, and I'm going to give it a name of sequences, what it'll do is do just that. It's going to create a bin over here with the name that we want. Let's go a little deeper. I'm going to next make another variable, and this is that same idea that I mentioned earlier, where I didn't want to keep typing out these next levels of code over and over again. I'm going to declare a variable called bin1, and I'm just going to connect that to the root item.children with an index of 0. So what we have here is basically what you're going to need to use to access anything deeper and deeper throughout a Premiere project. Right now, we called the project, got into that, we went to the root item, which is like accessing our project panel, and then we asked for the children of that root item. And we asked for the 0 children because when you're looping through an array in JavaScript, you start at 0, 1, 2. You don't start at 1, 2, 3. And this is just JavaScript basics, so if you are a little hazy on that or you haven't learned any of that, I really recommend going to like codeacademy.com or lynda.com and taking some JavaScript intro. It's going to help you get through this a lot quicker and easier. So now that I've created a variable called bin1 and I've linked it to project.rootItem.children0, let's alert what the name of that is just to make sure that we're getting the right thing. All right. So that has returned that the name of this is sequences, and it actually, because I didn't comment that out as well, it created another sequence over here. So we'll just delete one of those, run it again. And yes, it's returning sequences for us. But say I want to rename that bin. And this is something that I do quite a bit when I'm moving things around and running scripts from a bin-based workflow, which we'll go into a little bit later. Just know that it's really important to be able to create bins, move them around, rename them. It just helps the organization of your project a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call bin1 and access the name. And I'm going to make that equal movies, which is just going to do exactly that. It's going to change the name of bin1 from sequences to movies. It's going to alert us the name, and then boom, it's changed up here to movies. So there we go. And then I decide after that that I want to create another bin and name it sequences. So I'm just going to delete this so it all runs at once. And I'm going to comment out the alert of the name because we don't want to keep getting this alert every time we run this script. And now what this is going to do, once we uncomment the first create bin, is it's going to create a bin called sequences. It's going to rename that bin to movies, and it's going to create another bin called sequences. And there we go. Now, next thing I want to do is, let's just say I want to move one bin into another. So we already know that bin1 is linked to the movies bin, which means that if we wanted to make another variable and call it bin2, we could link that to project root item children with an index of 1, and that will give us the sequences bin. So if I wanted to move, say, the sequences bin into the movies bin, what I would do is, now that I have both of those bins isolated and declared as variables, so I would uncomment this and I'll do bin2.moveBin bin1. And the move bin method is kind of weird and kind of confusing. Think of it like move this dot move bin to here. I get confused with this quite a bit because I try and put the bin that I want it moved into at the front and then move the target bin here. It can just get really confusing. So always just remember, if you're moving bins around, you want to target the bin that you want to move. And within the method, you're going to call the bin that you want it inside of. So let's try this out. I'm going to, again, delete these movies over here. That way it just runs the whole script all at once. And there we go. It looks like it just created the movies bin, but if we pop that down, the sequences bin is inside there. Going to delete that again because we're just kind of going through this. Next, well, if we're in Premiere, we're probably going to be working with sequences in some way. So let's create a sequence. We're going to do all of this and then create a sequence called movie1. So I just here declared a variable, named it sequence name, and gave it a name of movie1. And now that I have sequence name as a variable that's housing this string, I will run this, which will be project.createNewSequence, sequence name, which is going to really be just this, and then give it a unique ID that is going to be the unique indicator of this sequence in case we want to access it in the future. So now if we run this, it's going to pop this up. And this is a little annoying if in the middle of a script, it's going to ask you what type of sequence you want it to make, because then you have this thing popping up over and over. And if you're, say, trying to create 1,000 sequences, which this could normally do in less than a couple seconds, you're going to need to specify what type of sequence you want. So we'll go into in a future movie how to create a sequence from a preset. But for now, just for this example, we're going to just choose one. And now we have that sequence built and the timeline becomes active for it. So now if I want to move the sequence into, say, this deeper sequences folder, How are we going to do that? Well, I'm going to start by creating two variables. I'm going to name one seek bin and target seek. And then I'm going to create another variable and attach that to the project, root item, children, num items. Now what this does is it just tells me how many items I have at the root of my project. So think about this again. You access the app, you access the project, and you access the root item, which is basically this panel. Children.numItems is going to tell me how many items I have right here, which is going to be 2. Now, one thing that's tricky about Premiere is that the index IDs like 0 and 1, that the items that are in the project get assigned, they can kind of shift around and they're not as consistent as you would like. So when you're going through and searching to grab an item and move it or do something to it, you really have to access it in different types of ways. So for what we're going to do today, we're just going to create a for loop and search for the name of what we want to move. So here we're going to do for variable a equals 0, a is less than num items, a plus plus, which is going to say we're going to start this variable out at 0. As long as a is less than the number of items in the project panel, we're going to go through this loop and then add 1 onto a. Then here we're going to do an if statement. We're going to say project.rootItem.children a name.index of sequence name. Now this is pretty long and I try to avoid this, but I just didn't create a variable and link the name of this anywhere. So what this is saying is that it's going to go to children a, which in this case, in the first iteration of this loop, is going to be children 0 dot name dot index of sequence name. So this is basically grabbing the name of the first item in the project. Then it's asking if the index of sequence name shows up in that at all. So we know that sequence name is movie.1. So we're basically asking it if the name of that first project item is movie number 1, then we're going to link the variable target sequence to that item. And it's the same deal with the next for loop. We're going to do the same thing with a variable b, and we're going to do project root item children b name index of movies is greater than -1. And if that is true, we're going to link that index path to seek bin. And not just that index path, we're going to go to children b, which is in this case the item that we're looking at. Then we're also going to link it to the child of that 0. So we are linking the sequence bin variable to the child of the movies bin, the first child of the movies bin, which, because we don't have anything else in the movies bin, is going to be the sequences bin. Now, if we run the same method that we did earlier, the move bin method, on the target seek, which is the movie number 1, the target of what we want to move, and we move that into the folder. And first I'm going to delete all these so that it runs this whole thing. It should work. And now we have a bin called movies, a bin called sequences, and a bin called movie number 1. So I said I was going to keep this movie quick, and I know I went on a little bit longer, but you can see that even doing some of the most simple tasks with scripting, they take a bit longer to get through and to write up. But there really is a learning curve here where once you learn how to do this stuff, you can whip through it pretty quick. And it also saves you that large amount of time on the back end. If you dedicate an hour to scripting even a simple task, and then you have that script ready, and you run that in your normal workflow day in and day out when you're editing, it can really pay back that time. That investment comes back. What we need to do now is try to figure out a way to find out how to access the things that we want to access in Premiere in a more efficient way so that we're not just searching and trying to access items that we don't have access to. And there is a sample document on the Adobe GitHub page that gives you a bunch of sample code that can help get you through this. We'll go into that a little bit more next week, but we'll also talk about a few tools you can use from within OnScript and from within Premiere to get this information a little quicker. And also, please, 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 if you have any questions about this, leave a comment on YouTube, leave a comment on the blog. If you have any feedback on how I can present this stuff a little bit better, again, I said in the first movie that, I'm not a software engineer and I'm not formally educated in this material. I'm just a video editor that wanted to take control of my Premiere workflow. So please give me any feedback, comments, suggestions. They'll be absolutely appreciated.